So once again, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand over to Tim now. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Nathan. And just by way of introduction, I've been a school teacher myself for, 23 years actually, believe it or not, before I started in my current role as Adobe's Senior Education Specialist for the Asia Pacific region. And I do a lot of online teaching. I have to cover the whole of the Asia Pacific region in my job, so there's a lot. The reality is there's also a heck of a lot of travel that I normally have to do. And it was the 5th of March this year. It was actually at a school here in Victoria that it was my last face-to-face engagement. It was a school that I'm very close to because I worked there for 13 years myself, and that's Strathcona Baptist Girls Grammar School. And that's when we got the email, the official email. No more travel, no more working with people face-to-face. So we were pretty early on in the whole system. I think Google was just ahead of us in terms of a multinational company just closing everything down. And since then, it has been madness. One webinar after another, just people wanting to know more about how to communicate effectively, digitally, online. And so it's been a privilege actually to be running webinars constantly and working with literally thousands of teachers over the last few weeks from all over the world to try and enhance their skills in this area. And so that's what this theme is all about. What makes for good online teaching? And one of the little tips and tricks that I'm going to give you right from the start is when you're doing a synchronous session like what we're doing now, where everyone's live and you're talking to your students, or in this case, your participants live, keep the recordings short and sharp. Don't record the whole lesson. Don't record the whole thing. No student, no participant wants to watch a whole hour of recording of a teacher doing what I'm doing now. It's just not good practice. So what I recommend you do, if at all possible, if you're going to be recording bits of your synchronous sessions, is to keep them short. And I'm about to stop this one now because this is our intro chapter. I've introduced myself, Nathan's introduced me, and this little chapter is about to conclude. Hi folks, Tim Kitchen here, working with DLTV on this topic about what makes effective online teaching experiences. And I've just shown the people that are with us live, we've got nearly 70 people who are with us live from all over Victoria, shown them an article that I wrote on the 24th of March just to help teachers make their online teaching experience more engaging. Let me just bring that article up now so you can see it. It's titled Presenting Engaging and Creative Online Teaching and Learning Experiences. One of the reasons I wrote this was because I was noticing that the teachers that were struggling, what they were doing is really just going back to basics and saying, here's a worksheet, go and answer these questions and then submit them via email and I will give you your result. I mean, that is just so unengaging. It's like going back to when we were at school and teachers were literally giving out the textbook and you have to read the textbook and answer the questions and so teacher directed, but because they were in a situation where they were scared in a sense and not knowing what to do, that they fell back to that approach because they were probably more comfortable in that approach. That's going to turn off your students straight away. What you need to realize, folks, is that your students, most of them, they're used to an online world. They're actually used to being incredibly engaged in an online world. Your students probably spend more time online than they do at school. I'm not saying all of them, but let's think about how gaming has become such a part of young people's lives, not just young people too, lots of people's lives, and they're gaming and networking and sharing their voice and their face and communicating and collaborating to try and achieve some sort of purpose. They're used to that process and they do it all the time. Whereas most teachers don't do that, and this has been quite difficult for them. So when we start this session here, I've got this section on synchronous and asynchronous, and it's important that we understand the difference between them. Synchronous is what we're doing right now. I'm actually communicating with about 70 teachers online, live, and it's in sync. So it's a synchronous session. we need to try and keep our synchronous sessions short and sharp and to the point. Some schools are sticking to the timetable, and in a sense that makes sense, but I really wouldn't be recommending that if you've got a double English, that you're now going to have a double English synchronous session with your students, because that is just not going to work. Maybe, have a 5-minute synchronous session at the start of the double, and then encourage the students to be working on a range of activities that last that 90-minute period, say, before they move on to another subject. That'll work, but don't think you need to be on the show all the time, because that'll be incredibly exhausting for you, but incredibly boring for your students too. I mean, no offense, folks, teachers are not designed to be television presenters, engaging face-to-face live presenters in front of a camera. That's not what we're trained to do. Some of us do it really well, not many of us do. So keep your synchronous sessions really, really as short as possible and to the point. Often with your synchronous sessions, you might want to do them in small groups too, and just say, look, I just want to work with these groups of students now. Let's just find out how you're going. And then in 15 minutes time, we'll go with this group of students, just to keep that small group and that sort of differentiation happening as well, so that you can make sure that everyone is getting the attention they need. I'm not going to read every part of this paragraph because everyone live has got access to it. Those who haven't got live, who are watching the recording of this, if you want to go to timkitchen.net, in fact, Nathan, I'll get you to put that in the chat pod now if you don't mind, timkitchen.net, and that'll give you a link to my journal where this has been published. When it comes to this section here, effective synchronous teaching online is quite different to teaching face-to-face. It involves a set of skills that develops with experience. It's more like being a live TV or radio presenter than it is being a school teacher or a university lecturer. I'm trying to reassure you here to say, don't worry if you struggle in this new form of pedagogy, because it's not easy. It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of us. And your students will be patient with you because they know it's not easy. One of the things I do recommend in this section here is to get one of your students, maybe a different one each time, to become a moderator to help you during these synchronous times. At the moment, I've got a whole team of moderators from DLTV, which is great. So when the chat's coming and there's questions to be answered, they're doing that behind the scenes. I'm not having to worry about that. If someone opens up their web camera and suddenly we can see them and they're sitting on the toilet somewhere, which has happened, trust me, it happens, my moderator can very quickly close down their camera for them. Little things like that, and students like to get the support, get the responsibility to know that they're actually helping the teacher, and it becomes a good leadership opportunity for that student when you give them that extra responsibility, depending on what your platform can do. And most platforms allow for you to have an extra host or someone who you can nominate as their host. So help is closer than you may think by thinking of your students as a first point of call for technical help. We do it all the time in the classroom, don't we? Oh my goodness, the DVD's not working, and you know who to get to help you. It'll always be a student. What online teaching platform is best? I'm often asked this, and of course I work for Adobe, so people just assume that I'm going to say Adobe Connect. But I'm not going to say that, because there's lots of different types of systems out there and they all do different things. Notice I'm not using Adobe Connect because this isn't necessarily a teaching time, although it is. I'm not breaking you out into breakout groups. I'm not setting up lots of little polls and having this as a part of a sequence of lessons that we're doing over a period of time. That's what Adobe Connect does incredibly well. It's designed for pedagogy. It's designed as a teaching tool. But when you're doing those short little synchronous sessions, it doesn't really matter what you use. What's important is that you've got something that the students can see you and you can see them initially. I don't say see them all the time. That becomes really distracting for everybody when that happens. But you need to have a chat feature so that you can communicate with them, like what we're doing at the moment. And a lot of systems have that. Microsoft Teams is fantastic. Zoom is amazing. Like the audio quality and the video quality and the fact that they're giving it for free. It was probably the most expensive conferencing system out there. But now it's free. I think you get 40 minutes for free or something like that. Incredible tool. GoToWebinar is really popular. BlueJeans is what I'm using. I'm using it because it's our standard conferencing tool for the Adobe company around the world. and we just use it for conferencing, but it's not a teaching and learning tool as such. So it hasn't got all the features of Adobe Connect. Blackboard Collaborate, which is part of the Blackboard LMS, there's so many out there. So it doesn't really matter as long as it kind of works for you. And probably more importantly, do you have the support at your school to help when things go wrong? So if the school has chosen to go down a particular path, even though you think it might not be the right one, probably the best one to use because you've got the support of the people around you. There are lots of free solutions out there like Google Hangouts and Skype and GoToMeeting and so on. Again, they're all good. They all do good things. Just be careful with the ones that are totally open where you don't have to put in a password. Just a little bit concerned about whether you end up getting advertising through them and whether they're as secure as others. So just little things to be aware of. Whichever system you use, make sure it has at least the following features: video and audio streaming, live chatting, the ability to share screens, a way of uploading and playing video content. Now, don't think that when you've got a PowerPoint presentation and there's a video embedded into it, that when you hit play on that video, that it's going to be a good experience for people. Here's a little technical thing, folks. When you play a video through, say, your PowerPoint presentation in an online system like this, you're seeing it at 7 frames per second, when that video was designed to be probably 25 frames per second. So what's happening is that you're only seeing 1 every 3 frames, and that's why you're getting this really awkward response. It'll still sound okay, but it won't look good. It's never a good experience. So what a lot of conferencing systems do is they allow you to embed or load your videos in advance. So notice that video, I know I'm recording this, but before we recorded this, notice that I played a video to you that gave you instructions on how to use BlueJeans. That video played beautifully because it's loaded into the system. If I played that video off my PowerPoint or my keynote, it wouldn't have been a good experience and you probably wouldn't have got much out of it. A way of seeing names and participants is good, and a way of muting or disabling participants when that is required, because sometimes that is important. So that's my initial advice when it comes to synchronous tools and synchronous teaching, and we're going to stop this chapter now and talk a little bit about preparation for a synchronous session in a sec. So I'll just stop my sharing and stop the recording. Oh, didn't get the cue. Normally we get a little cue saying it stopped. Hopefully that worked all right. So Nathan, is there anything I need to address in the chat?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to everybody, please do, if you have questions for Tim, you can put them in the chat and I'll take a note of them and make sure that we do give them to Tim before the end of the session if there's time. The only thing I noticed so far, Tim, there was a comment from the DET just regarding recording anything when there's students involved, just to say that consent would be required at DET schools at least in those cases. I would imagine at a lot of other schools too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just makes common sense. You never record students without permission of their parents. But the same is when you're doing a live session, you don't want to be recording. In fact, you should probably avoid even just having the webcams on. Well, I suppose it's recording that's the most important thing there. But of course, every system has their own ways of managing that. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. All right, let's move on to our next section. Another chapter during this online teaching with DLTV session, and we've got about 70 people now. So welcome those people who have just joined us since we started. What we're working through is an article that I wrote on the 24th of March titled Presenting Engaging and Creative Online Teaching and Learning Experiences. And we've been looking at synchronous teaching and how to do that effectively. In terms of preparing for an online synchronous session, there are a few things that you need to make sure that you do reasonably well. I've suggested here there's similarities between an effective online teaching experience, a synchronous experience, and a live TV production. And I'll be talking about how to use the camera. It's amazing how, I'm just going to see if I can see myself. I can see myself on another monitor here, and it's going to show you what I see sometimes happen when I join sessions. Sometimes, I'm actually going to stop sharing so you can see this on a bigger screen maybe. Sometimes people will come into the room and they'll look like this. Hi everyone, how are we going? Oh, it's good to see you. It's good. And it becomes almost like a comedy just to see how they think that everything's fine, but everyone's actually laughing at them because of the framing. Now, when you're doing a synchronous session, it's so important to think about the framing and the use of the camera. Do you notice that I'm actually looking directly at the camera a lot of the time? I'm doing that deliberately because when I look at the camera, in theory, I'm looking at people's eyes who are looking back at me. Just like when you're in a classroom and you're addressing your students face to face and giving them eye contact, it's the same thing. Notice that I'm using my hands as well to communicate because there's a lot of body language that I'm sharing that you're picking up without me actually verbalizing it as well. So the camera really should see like around about the torso, shoulders and hands and face. I've got a really good microphone here, but I never put my mouth over the microphone like technically I should be to get the best quality audio because I want people to see my mouth. It's really important that all your students can actually see the shape of your mouth and it going up and down because it's amazing how many students are actually lip reading when they don't realize they are, and how many students are actually lip reading because that's the only way they can communicate as well. And if you're hiding your mouth behind a microphone, then that's going to be a bit of an issue for them. So just little tips like that are important. In terms of framing, when I do a lot of video production, a lot of teaching video, and one of the most important things that we teach is this thing called headroom. The top of the head should be around about the top of the frame. That's bad. That's too much headroom, far too much headroom. That's good. And if you can center yourself, that's even better. When we're doing it properly for television or for a film, we use the rule of thirds. So we keep the person to the left or to the right. So we've got looking room for them. We've got space to put credits and titles and things like that. But for a webinar experience, when you could have multiple people presenting or sharing, it's good to be centered and framed. Think about filling the frame with what's important. In this case, it's you that's important. Think about your background. With some products like Zoom, I know that you can actually put in all sorts of backgrounds. You can actually chroma key out whatever the background is. That only really works if you've got a fairly neutral background anyway for it to key against. And that's fine, but it can be a bit distracting at times as well. Try to make sure you don't have family members coming in and out behind you because that can be annoying. And think about it ethically. If you've got young people, children who are just coming in and out of your shot all the time during a synchronous session, that's not a good look either. I'm just going to start sharing here and just show you some of these tips. Try and contact your students in advance via email to ensure that they know how to access the site and when the sessions are taking place. Keeping to the usual school or university timetable is advisable, but it's not that important. What's more important is that the students know when they're meant to be on and when they're not, so give them plenty of notice. Provide your class with some video content or reading to digest in advance of a synchronous session. It'd be interesting to know how many of you are familiar with the flipped learning model. In fact, I'm going to jump to the chat pod now. I'm just looking at the chat pod. Can you give me a yes or no? Are you familiar with flipped learning? I just want to get a reading from the group. We've got a few yeses, lots of no's, a few more yeses, quite a few no's, and a few yeses, no's, very limited, no. Lots of no's. Okay, good. All right. So I might spend just a few minutes talking about flipped learning because there's a lot of correlation, and it's Jill saying yes, but hard to do with busy students. Yeah, depends how you do it. But there's a link there I've got. I think it's to flippedlearning.org, which is probably the best place to go to learn more about flipped learning. But in essence, it's all about the actual teaching, the actual content delivery happening outside of the classroom. So you're flipping the learning. What that means is that you're giving the students video content or even reading content that they need to digest before they come to class. And then when they come to class, you're not spending time going over that content because they've already basically got it. What you're doing is you're spending time delving into that content and really teasing it out to get the best out of your students in discussion, in activities, in ways that brings you up Bloom's taxonomy up to that top point of being creative. Otherwise, you you're tempted to stay down at the bottom part of the pyramid, which is all about, you must learn this fact for an exam, so I will teach it to you now. That's bad teaching. That's bad pedagogy. And we should be way beyond that now, because we know so much more about how the brain works, and we've learned so much more about what is good teaching practice. And if you're still that type of teacher that is focused on getting my students ready for an exam or a test, that's at the bottom level of teaching. We really should be trying to get our students up to that peak of being creative and developing new content from the facts and figures that they learn. That's what being creative is often about. So that flipped learning approach can be very helpful in an online session, because you're providing them links to videos that are important so they get that content. And then when you have your synchronous session, you can really then tease out, even going to breakout groups if your system allows you to, or if it doesn't, again, time different sessions with small groups so you can work with the high flyers and get them going with things. Work with the students who you know won't read or won't watch the videos. They're the students who you will spend time going over the content with, because you kind of have to. That happens in a classroom as well. But you'll always have such a mix of students to work with. It's very much a student-centered approach as opposed to a teacher-centered approach. And that's been good professional teaching practice for many years now. Let's see what's next here. Prepare a series of short video resources in advance. Now, that's easier said than done, because let's face it, most teachers are not video producers. So they'll go to YouTube, they'll go to Khan Academy, they'll go to whatever resources are out there and then use those, which is fine. But here's a little theory, folks. My theory is, and I've been talking to Monash University about testing this theory out properly, and that is, if the student's own teacher produces the video, it becomes a better learning experience for the student. And I've tested that out anecdotally for years, and I'm seeing so much anecdotal evidence that that is the case. Even if you're not an experienced video producer, there is so much that you bring across to your own students without realizing it when you're creating a video. A lot of it's got to do with the fact that you have that relationship with them. They know you. They know your mannerisms. They know the way you communicate with your body language as well as your verbal language. And so if you can be prepared to be on camera and to share content that way, it becomes a powerful tool. But then I want you to think about this from a student's perspective too, about video as a way of a student constructing their learning and a student reflecting on their learning. You see, video has now become a literacy. It's actually just as important now to be able to make quality video as it is to be able to read and write. I used to say it will become as important. It has now become that. It has become a literacy that we really need to get our heads around. So what I've recommended here is a couple of things. Yes, they are Adobe things, but that's because I work for Adobe. But with Spark Video, I tell you what, I'm yet to come across any software that is as simple to use to make a quality video with all its features like voiceovers and animation and text and music and then creating something that you can just quickly put onto your learning management system or you can share as a video file. Incredibly powerful tool. Now, I'm not going to teach you Spark Video because that's not what this session's about, but I will be giving you some resources later to help you learn things like Spark Video. Just out of interest, on the chat pod, let's have a look. Who has used any of the Spark tools before? Give us a yes or a no. I just want to get a sense in the room. We've got lots of no's. That's new for a lot of people.
No.
Lots of no's. Got a few yeses, which is cool. All right, it's interesting because the Spark tools have been around for about 4 years now and considered the simplest way to make videos and web pages and posters and things like that. And they're all free and they're all iOS and they're amazing. So let me encourage you to look into the Spark tools as a way of getting content created for a synchronous session, but also as an asynchronous way of communicating. Really cool. I noticed in the chat pod, someone said, their guest 92 said Premiere Pro. You're not going to want to use Spark Video. If you're already using Premiere Pro, it means you're a very advanced video editor. You are in that very small minority of teachers who have got incredible video editing skills already because you're using a high-end professional tool like Adobe Premiere Pro. In between that, because a lot of teachers find Spark Video too simple, they'll jump to Premiere Rush. And we created Premiere Rush just so, because Premiere Pro was too complicated for most teachers. And Premiere Rush gives you so much more power. You've got 4 layers of video, 4 layers of audio, and you can work away to your heart's content on your phone. It's such an amazing tool. So there's a link there to give you some more information on how you can develop your video skills for synchronous and asynchronous teaching. Have some polls and quizzes prepared in advance for your students. Some of your synchronous tools do actually allow you to do that within the tool. Some don't. Some are just conferencing tools like Zoom. So you'd want to then maybe just use the chat pod like I did before, where you pose a question, get responses, get that interactivity happening. That's always good. Create a slide deck with PowerPoint or Keynote or Acrobat that you can use to guide students through the main teaching points. And then make sure, if it's a PowerPoint or a Keynote, make sure you do export that as a PDF so that it can go into your learning management system so the students can have easy access to it. The problem with PowerPoint is that if you just bring the PowerPoint deck, which is usually a massive file, into your LMS, it just crashes everything. So please get used to converting your PowerPoint slides and your Keynote slides into a PDF document so that the students have better access. One of the great things about Acrobat DC, which is part of the Creative Cloud, and if you're not aware, all the Creative Cloud applications are now available to every Victorian secondary school. The department have paid for them so that all students and all teachers in the secondary system in Victoria get access to the full Creative Cloud. So you've got these tools to play with. So that's another good tip. Try to, when you go to save as in Acrobat, you can save as a low res file. So that PDF isn't a massive file. You can usually get like a 40 megabyte PDF down to about 2 megabytes and still make it look pretty good. That'll just load up and down, which is pretty handy. Turn off notifications on your devices and remove any other potential distractions. Ask family members if they could try to avoid internet-based activities when you're doing these synchronous sessions, and that's often easier said than done. And if possible, here's probably a really important tip. If you're in a house that was built in the last 10 years, you're likely to have internet points in certain rooms. If you can, plug your laptop into those points with an Ethernet cable, a Cat5 or a Cat6 cable. You might, if you're using a Mac, you'll need to get a special dongle that'll fit it. But all of a sudden, you'll get so much more performance out of your internet if you're directly plugged in rather than relying on Wi-Fi, which is what most people do. So that's my final little tip there. And we will just stop sharing, stop the recording, and check the chat pod. On to our next little section here, I'll just jump straight into the article that I wrote. And this is all about using your webcam and your microphone. If you're in a quiet room, you can probably get away with just using your computer's internal microphone. However, in most cases, it's best to use a headset with a mic. The closer the mic is to the mouth, the better. When we're doing video production, we talk about proximity of the microphone. If it's a boom mic, we try to keep the boom mic just out of shot, just out of the headroom shot. If it's a lapel mic, we'll put it about here. But again, it's all about proximity. And the best proximity is around about a hand span away from the source, if you can get the mic back close. If you're using your internal system, that's okay. You just need to get reasonably close to it to get quality. And the problem is that sometimes the spill of other people's voices from the speakers comes into the microphone and becomes a really bad experience for all the other users, which is why it's important to have headphones and a headset. And I've found that the Apple headset, I've got one here actually, I find when I'm not doing a really serious production like I'm doing now, when I've got my professional mic and headsets, I find these are amazing. The quality of these are almost equivalent to this really expensive microphone I've got here. But of course, when you're working online, your quality's compromised a lot because there's a lot of compression that happens between when I speak and when you actually hear. So even though I've got a quality mic, it's probably not going to sound a lot different to if I used a relatively cheaper mic. But proximity is much better than quality in that sense. I've suggested here it's often good to start a session by opening up your webcams, but of course sometimes you just can't for ethical reasons. But if you can, if you're allowed to, if you're not recording, for instance, you're allowed to, it's good just for the community side, just to see everyone, make sure everyone's okay, and just get that sense of community. And then when you start the actual teaching side, encourage them to turn off their cameras, similar to what I'm doing with you guys now. When it's time to start a synchronous teaching session, encourage the students to mute their cameras as well as their microphones. This will save internet bandwidth, but also lessens distractions as well. Notice that we talked about the lip syncing, and that's important just to keep that in mind. And your body language is almost as important as your verbal language. And we talked about looking at the webcam that comes up there. Ensure there's plenty of light, and natural light is best. And just to be technical here, I've got a lot of natural light coming in from this side, so I'm probably a little bit shaded on this side. That's really good. When we light a set for a film production, what we do is we literally do that. We get more light coming in on one side than the other so that we get this illusion of depth. So it's actually a good thing to have that. If it's at night, for instance, there's no natural light coming in, just make sure you've got all your lights on in your room. I know it's going to use up a bit of electricity, but it's important that your students can see you clearly. Try to monitor your sessions too. During most sessions, you will log into the system as a host, which usually provides you with access to extra features and different screen layouts and so on. But you're not necessarily seeing what your participants are seeing. So right now, as I'm talking to you on this webcam and this system, right next to me is another computer. It could be an iPad, it could be a phone. In this case, it's actually another laptop. And I'm logged in as a participant. So I can see exactly what you're seeing. And I'm also seeing the chat. And that allows me to know when there's chat going on. And if there's an issue, if I think I'm sharing my screen when I'm actually not sharing my screen, I can have a quick look. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. And that happens all the time. In fact, just this morning, I was on a call with a guy who's an incredibly experienced educator. This guy was a professor at Stanford University. This guy was the head of the Khan Academy in America. So incredibly experienced online communicator. And we're having this call, and all of a sudden he was talking about something that he assumed was being shared, but it wasn't. And he was with our whole team. We had about 12 of us on the call, and I just had to stop him and say, all right, you're actually not sharing your screen. And of course he went all red because he's meant to be like a world expert, but even world experts will have those moments where things just haven't worked out the right way. Happens to me all the time. So having a monitor there is really helpful. With the flow of a synchronous session, introduce each session with an interaction activity like a quiz or a chat feature. Set up a poll question if you can, just to keep that interactivity going, as I've mentioned before. Set the aim and objectives of what that session's all about. I know that's not what we often do when we're in the classroom, but if the students know exactly what they're expected to do and what they're going to be expected to be hearing in advance, it kind of keeps them engaged for that period of time. Then they know how long they're going to be there for. It's what's called good practice when you're teaching adults, is to always share what you're going to be doing first. When you're teaching students or children, it's not necessarily as important, but in this case, it probably is a little bit more important. When verbally presenting the main context, mix it with a variety of images, animations, and video content, and that's always helpful. In fact, I'm about to play a video very soon that I think is one of the best videos I've seen in terms of teaching online practice, and I'll be showing you that in a sec. Keep an eye on the chat when possible, or get someone to monitor it for you. Encourage the students to also email questions. You'll notice there will be some students who just do not want to use the chat because it's live. It's a little bit embarrassing if they make a typo, or they just don't want to be sharing something in front of everybody. That's perfectly fine. Encourage them to email you. Tell them you're not necessarily going to answer it straight away, but at least do respond to them and give them that one-to-one support that is so important. And every 10 minutes or so, ask your students to give feedback via the chat feature. It's a great way to monitor their engagement. Just like I do, I'll stop the recording and I will just be checking with you guys. I'm just going to stop now and we're going to check the chat. All right, folks, we are just in the home stretch now of our webinar session together, and I'll just finish off with the last couple of paragraphs here on my article. When it comes to recording, one of the things I did mention earlier is please don't record the whole of a session. Keep your recordings really short, and the Kev Lavery video that we just watched at reconfirms that. When the crisis is over, then think about how you might change your practice when you're back face to face with your students again, because it'll be over before we know it. we're already starting to ease restrictions in terms of the medical restrictions. Elective surgery is looking like coming back next week in Victoria and so on. So eventually we'll be coming back to face, which would be great. But think about all the incredible skills that you have developed during this time. Video editing, working with a learning management system, and think about how they could then help you with your face-to-face teaching in the future and help you develop your own professional practice as an educator. So there's some really good things that are happening at the moment. The last part of my article has a summary of all the main tips there, which you can look at in your own time. And that link to that video that I played will appear here as well. Lots of free resources and other information here if you're interested. There's the link to the video, which is on this article, and some extra reading as well that I was reading before that I thought was really good. I'm just going to stop sharing. No, I won't stop sharing. I'll just keep going onto my keynote deck because there's just some resources I wanted to share with you. So I'll put these on full screen. And the first one is this resource here. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to bring this into the chat pod for those who are with us live. Those who are watching the recording, you can see it there, edx.adobe.com/distance-learning. I'm going to bring that into the chat pod. Just about every day, we're adding new resources to this resource. For those of you who are not members of the Education Exchange, I encourage you to join up. We've got close to 800,000 teachers now on the Adobe Education Exchange. And it's our main portal for our professional learning opportunities, for resources. It doesn't matter what you teach, whether it's math, science, English, or IT media. It doesn't matter if it's primary, secondary, or higher ed. There's some really good resources for you. And these are, hello, Siri. Siri's just opened up for some reason. And these are some courses, articles, and blogs.
Good afternoon, Tim.
Good afternoon,
How's
Siri.
it going?
Going well, thank you. You can go away now. And when you look at the courses and articles and blogs here, these are all related to distance learning and should be very helpful for you. I'm running a series of webinars every week now, and they're usually on a Wednesday night, starting at 7 p.m., 7 till 9 p.m., and there is one tonight. Tonight's one is focused on augmented reality experiences, focused on 3D imagery. I've got Dr. Max Sleasure from Swinburne University joining me. He's an expert in filmmaking and mobile filmmaking. Every one of these sessions is going to be also focused on enhancing your skills in online teaching and learning. And I encourage you to look at that link. In fact, I'll just grab that link now and put it in the chat pod, and you'll get more information about my weekly webinars. What were monthly face-to-face events around the country are now weekly webinars until we all get back, and then they'll be back to probably monthly face-to-face events again. Let's show you the next one. The next one is the actual Adobe Education Exchange itself. Lots of amazing resources there. I'll just bring that into the chat pod so you can see that. And the Adobe Help Center, if you're wanting some help with some of our tools, this gives you beginner's guides to full-on advanced masterclasses on every one of our products. So that's well worth bookmarking if you need like a first point of call for support and help with the Adobe tools. I've been setting up a set of video tutorials to help students and teachers work with a range of our products like the Spark tools and Character Animator, and how to compress large image files into small files so you can put them on your learning management system, things like that. That's in a series here called the Adobe Edu Tips. So I've just put that into the chat pod too. That could be very helpful for you in an asynchronous mode. And I'm just going to finish off now before we have a look at any questions by holding up this slide here. If you want to grab your camera and just hover over that QR code, you'll actually get access to an online form that allows you to get in touch with us. If you're interested in finding out more about what we can do to help you, if you want to be part of my email list, if you want to find out about our leadership program, just little things like that, that's a way of getting in touch with us. I'll just grab the URL in case the QR code doesn't work for you, and I'll put that into the chat pod too, but I didn't want to spend too much time on that. It's just if you have got an interest in digital creativity, we are the world leader in that realm, and we have so many great resources for you. All the slides that I've presented today are available for you at this link, and I'm just going to put that in the chat pod too. So you've got access to it, and I look forward to hopefully catching up with you either tonight at my webinar starting in a couple of hours, or at a future event. But I want to thank DLTV for giving me this opportunity to share my passion for digital creativity in an online world to help engage students and encourage creative teaching and learning. So I'll just keep that up there. I know that Nathan will probably have another form he would like to hand out, and maybe there's some questions in the chat pod that we need to go through.
Tim, I'd just like to thank you as well from DLTV's point of view. Fantastic presentation. So really, really good. I suppose one of the things that sprang to my mind is when's a good time to do a presentation? If you're going from this one to one at 7 o'clock, but that was great. Thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
No worries. I'm actually working on a video at the moment that I'm presenting with, believe it or not, Sir Ken Robinson. Now, he's my guru. He's my absolute guru, and he's keynoting an event in New South Wales next week, an on-demand event, and they've asked me to produce a keynote as well. So I'm incredibly anxious about this, and I've been spending hours and hours getting this video right. So that'll be available next week for New South Wales. In fact, they're opening that up for the whole world. It's not just for New South Wales. So I'll let you get some information on that. Or if you look at timkitchen.net, that will update you with what we're doing there.
No worries. Thanks, Tim. So I've recorded a couple of questions that came in. One was from Jeff saying, how do you deal with students who are having technical difficulties during a chat when you're actually dealing with the rest of the students? There were a couple of suggestions from other people on the team, but what are your thoughts, Tim?
Well, get other students to support them. That's why you have a moderator, like a key person that usually knows a way around a computer to help in that case. There's only so much you can do, especially when it's live, and if things don't work out, get in touch with that person through email, try and sort them out before the next session comes along.
I think that's all I've got for now, Tim, but please accept my thanks too for your work today. It's been terrific. Just before people go too, also let you know that there is a repeat session of this webinar, which is also kind of full, but we will be having Tim back again sometime in term 2 and 3, and hopefully to talk about the Spark stuff. So that'll be great.
But I'll stop the recording now, but I'll hang around for a little while if anyone wants to ask me anything. So those watching the recording, thanks for joining us on the recording, and I look forward to catching up with you another time.